All right, here we go. Special edition of Ungovernable. Usually we're on Monday nights, but I had a mea culpa with our guest, so I definitely wanted to get him onto a program. Obviously, I'm flying solo tonight. Jocelyn is off at practice and doing her thing. So as a reminder, as usual, like, comment, subscribe, share. If you're watching us on the blockchain, Odyssey, Vim.tv, or if you watch this on the recorded version on 3Speak, give us a thumbs up, help us with some crypto. And then also donos are always welcome with our Cointree address that are in the description of all of our videos. And oh yeah, if you listen to the audio version, help us out with a review or a thumbs up there, because that also helps get this along. So no wine opening, no bouginess tonight. I want to welcome my guest on as quickly as possible. It's been a while since I've had him on the show. And it's been far too long. So we got some catching up to do and a ton of stuff to talk about. So without any undue pause any further, I want to welcome Jeremiah, aka Insanity is Free, to Ungovernable again. How are you, Jeremiah?
Yo, I'm more of a negative asshole than ever. So
that's okay. You complete the karmic balance that is needed in this universe, I think. All right, so before we get rolling, I always forget this until the end, so I want to make sure that I do at the beginning. If people are looking to follow your content, because I know you do blogging, videos, post online a lot, where can they find your information?
So you can go to Cointree, /insanity is free. So that's cointree.ee. So like the cointrd.ee/insanity is free. You can find a bunch of links there, but you can find me if you want to look specifically at Jeremiah Talks on YouTube. /insanity is free basically anywhere. You can find me Jeremiah.exe. I also do work at agorism. We're doing a documentary and running a fundraiser for that right now. So if you want to support that, it'll be on the COVID-19 enabled super state that's being built as chains around all of our necks, hands, and feet in order to turn the world into a bunch of privacy-free serfs for the New World Order.
Anyone who's not familiar with agorism, what is that?
Agorism is an outlet for agorist and other anarchist content. We also do news, economics. I did an article there on the Gray Man, which we discussed last time I was on. And generally, the vibe around anarchist content there is we want to help people understand the problem and then give them concrete solutions. I also am on the podcast there, so if you don't have time to read some shit, or if you're like a trucker or some shit, you've got options. We're doing everything, and also we're doing the reverse of that now, which is taking more time, but I think it's valuable, where every podcast will have a somewhat entertainingly done set of sources in article form. That's sort of a recap of the episode itself, so that if you if you're hearing disabled, you can still engage in the anarchist space that we're trying to foster here. And so all of that, we're gonna get a gardening series up on our Odyssey channel for Daggerist, because it's good to be a warrior in a garden, not a gardener in a war. So that sort of vibe, we're all about practical stuff there. And then if you want my edgier, more directly and openly hostile content, you can follow me everywhere else.
Yeah. I would say your show, for me as an anarchist, is like the equivalent of listening to heavy metal. Like when you're having one of those days. I love that about agorism, because a ton of people will get online and they will they can see the bullshit we're going through, and they can call out the bullshit. But quite often what's lacking is that follow through, right? Like just being able to identify it is step one, right? What's step 2, step 3, step 4 is, all right, then what do you do with it? Can you capitalize on it, find your way around it, work on some other things in order for you to not necessarily be subjected to all of that stuff that's going on right now. So the first thing I wanted to talk about before we get into kind of current event type stuff is just in general, I've been reading a lot about counter economics. It's at the heart of certain things like crypto and other types of, like barter and stuff like that. Really simply, if you were to explain it to someone, how would you explain? Most people kind of understand the word economics. They don't understand economics, but they kind of understand the word economics. How would you explain counter economics to someone?
So, counter economics is the idea that there are multiple different types of markets
Mm,
present and available in any given society. There are like five main ones that the guy who started it, Samuel Edward Konkin III, had proposed existed. There's white, gray, pink, red, and black. So the white market is anything that is ethical and legal. But legal also means taxed and observed by the state.
mm,
So if you do anything white market, like, you've got a 9 to 5, you're working down at the Safeway or, whatever the Aldi's, Wawa, doesn't matter. Point is, I was trying to think of like regional shit. If I missed your store, it's because I don't care about your city. Um, no, it's so the general thing there is that anything white market is going to be like your normal kind of average Joe job, right?
mm,
The gray market is when you start to get into the territory of things that are legally questionable, and like sort of starting to dip your toes into hiding your transactions from the government,
mm,
doing work under the table, that sort of thing. And it's still ethical. Like, you don't need to aggress necessarily in order to participate. Like, I'm trading my turnips for your squash.
mm.
I'm trading my turnip squash soup for a pig,
Right.
something like that. Obviously that'd be an insane exchange rate unless you've got like a shit ton of turnip squash soup, but
Yeah.
people probably know what I'm saying here. Or like doing transactions in cryptocurrency instead of doing transactions in dollars over PayPal or something,
Mm,
where the government's going to be able to monitor it. And then black market transactions are the ones that are just illegal, like
mhm.
fully illegal, but also like aggression isn't required to participate. Then you get into pink and red, where it's like, the unethical markets, the ones
Mhm.
that you would have to aggress. The pink ones are things that are like ethically, like unethical but legal,
Yeah.
like, war, that sort of thing, police brutality. um then there's red, which is like, just the markets for things like, like rape,
Yeah.
trafficking,
Yeah. Usual.
murder, that sort of thing. Agorists oppose pink and red markets and try to avoid white markets,
Mm,
um, because they try to live ethical lives, and they also try to avoid participation in a fundamentally unethical system, which also robs them every time they participate. Um, and like, in avoiding, because I didn't choose the title for this presentation, but it's true. Counter economics, if you avoid the red and pink markets, you'll stand a much greater chance of staying alive. And
mm,
if you avoid the state's institutions, what they accept, they generally accept a lot of unhealthy and like, let's just say livingly unviable ways of um, participating in the economy.
yeah.
Um, and ultimately, their system relies on death. So if it's not saving your life to not participate in the white, pink, or red markets, then it might be saving somebody else's. And the more that you participate in the gray and black, the more the less funding they have, the less support, and the more like money you're not spending on their evil empire.
Yeah.
So, like, you're saving your life, you're saving other people's lives, simply by choosing to put your money where your mouth is. And that's the whole goal of it, is to, and like, you really got to be careful because the states work their way in everywhere. Like, he made a real strong point in one of the sort of founding books called the New Libertarian Manifesto. It's really fucking short if anybody wants to read it. Like, so go do that. There's that one, and then there's the Agorist Primer, which is like a pamphlet. So there's a really short book and a really short pamphlet, and that's basically all you need to understand the basics. And then everything else is just like looking into a specific thing to check and see which part of the rubric it lay on. But the general thing is, like, in the original book, like New Libertarian Manifesto, you end up with statements like corporations are an imitation of the state and not the market, because they're endowed with privileges and et cetera, blah. And you end up with this like mentality of, I'm not only going to avoid the state in its rawest form, like, I'm not going to be a troop or a cop, but I'm going to avoid it in its more like sinister and intrusive forms. Like, if I have the opportunity to buy something from a neighbor rather than from Walmart, I'll try to do that. Like the harder you go in the anti-corporate, like against state capitalism sort of mentality, the more agorist you become. And so it's sympathetic to both the ANCAP argument, because Konkin and Rothbard used to be tight. I mean, they're both dead now, but like they used to be tight until Konkin started to recognize that a lot of ANCAP stuff was sort of like blowing off the left for no reason. And so basically, this is sympathetic to the ANCAP side, but it's also sympathetic to a bunch of leftist sides, which is why Konkin was like one of the original founding people of the Alliance for the Libertarian Left, because this kind of mentality avoids a lot of the state capitalist moduses and mechanisms that piss off the left anyway. So if you're better at agorism, you're going to be more open to leftist ideas and leftist approaches, because you're opposing a lot of the same stuff that the left would oppose.
And I would make the distinction that, you're talking, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, the classic left, not the corporatist left that everyone thinks we have is the left today, right?
To be completely honest, those people are liars. I don't call them the left because they're lying. If you support Hillary Clinton, you're not a leftist. I mean, there can be an argument made for like authoritarian leftism like being possible, but it's certainly not possible by like coddling and supporting the state capitalist framework of America. And you're not going to get like any sort of authentic leftist like criticisms from the queen of warmongers and the embodiment of rot. You're not going to get anything from that establishment, the DNC, the Mike Bloomberg fascists who threw $100,000 at the Biden campaign to push him over the edge in Florida, but also said we're going to Xerox a fucking like description of like minorities in like high crime areas, and that you can just throw them against a wall. That's how you get the weapons and the drugs. That his whole deal was just like be a fascist, and people like don't understand that or don't fully appreciate how fascist it is. And like, it's funny to me when people claim leftism, or when people accuse that group of being the left, when Bloomberg is one of the richest people on the planet, and when his news outlets keep on giving him money to the point where he accelerated in the past 2 years like $20 billion. Like, fuck that piece of shit. That's not a leftist. And that guy doesn't give a shit about your class struggle. In fact, he would rather it get worse for you. And so would Biden, and so would Clinton, and so would all of these posers claiming to be on the side of social justice. Like, Twitter, like, it plays a big fucking game. Facebook and all these people play big fucking game about being on the side of minority rights, and we'll go for Black History Month, and we'll go for like Pride Month, and we'll make everything like rainbows or like fists in the air
Yeah.
once in a while. But then they just go on to support the least progressive initiatives and people because those people gave them money. Like the House of Saud was the biggest owner of Twitter for a bit there through Al-Walid bin Talal. And the House of Saud threw like a huge amount of money at Meta recently. But we're only supposed to talk about it when Trump, because the right is the only one who can have state capitalist collusion.
Yeah.
But then like these people are the same people with a hugely terrible LGBT rights record, and they're doing a genocide in Yemen. So like, what do you really care about? Do you care about like minority rights and leftist causes, or do you care about them sweet stacks? Yeah. And they like made it very clear what they care about. So did Biden by selling them $5 billion in weapons, and then participating with the French government in killing a bunch of people to secure an oil field, like in Yemen. It's fucking like obvious that these people aren't authentically leftist, because all of the things that leftists criticize, all of the things that leftists don't like about state capitalism, is what these people embody and do. Yeah. So yeah, I just call them liars because they're lying pieces of fascist fucking shit.
Yeah. Well, they've definitely perfected the propaganda of co-oping whatever comes along, right? I mean, some of it they generate themselves. Other things are, groundswell type movements that they end up then latching onto and then essentially infecting from the inside, right?
Embodiment of rot, like Tulsi Gabbard said. But even Tulsi Gabbard sucks ass. She's with Klaus Schwab.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny that you brought up kind of like the BLM stuff or like the DEI stuff. I just tweeted today. I was like, the moment that Wall Street says that like they're embracing DEI and starts advertising that, just means that they're gonna try and steal more equitably, right, from the middle class and from the poor, right? Like that's exactly what they're going after. Before we get too far down the train tracks in terms of like politic type stuff, I did want to just mention one thing about the counter economics. Like I had just finished Sal Mayweather's book. Absolutely fantastic book. Again, another one of these like short read kind of things. So like people don't have to worry that they're going to invest like, weeks and weeks into reading it. Some of the
we're going to have him on the show in like a month.
Yeah, I want to do like a specific show on it. So I don't know if I can get Sal or someone else to kind of like talk about it. Maybe I can reach out to you and we can talk about it with a couple more people involved. I like the examples in the book are fantastic because they talk about some of these situations where, like for instance, in some of these communist states where these like black and gray market participants were, smuggling in banned movies and things like that. And just something as simple as culture that showed that like, the propaganda was a lie. It was very profitable, but at the same time, it was also extremely revolutionary. Something that was also mentioned in here in terms of some of the thinkers that are referenced is also this interesting idea that when you engage in counter economics, typically what happens is the corruption from the white markets kind of overlaps a little bit. But the difference is that when you're successful in the black and gray markets, that a lot of times you end up being able to exist and almost become more powerful than the people that are kind of like restricted by the white markets that everyone else who lives in those white markets, they are essentially secondary to, they're like subservient to these people. But as soon as these people now gravitate into this kind of like this interspace of economics, a lot of these people throughout history that engaged in gray and black markets, they built up a lot of credit and a lot of control in some cases, or at least influence over these people that were, statesmen, or head of the communist state and things like that. It's a very interesting kind of commentary on what people don't really think about when it comes to, a lot of people think about, well, I just want to stay within the guide rails, right? I don't want to make any waves or anything like that. And then they gradually over time just lose control of themselves and lose control of their life. Whereas other people, even in the under the most oppressive regimes, chose to, take their own fate in their own hands. And they ended up being more powerful than they would have had they, marched the line and just been like a good party member. It's a really, really interesting concept that a lot of people don't think about. There's actually a story about, so New Orleans used to have a madam that ran a brothel in the French Quarter. To my knowledge, most of the women were voluntarily there. I don't know if they were forced there or not during that time period. Who knows? But the madam was pretty much the most powerful person in the entire city, and it was because she had information that a lot of people didn't want to get out there. A lot of people owed her favors or owed her money because she was also kind of like the bank for some of these corrupt people when they couldn't find money to buy a house or buy a car or something because they had bad credit, believe it or not, even though they're extracting, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars from the taxpayers. It's a very interesting concept that these people can end up becoming just, breaking out of the chains that are put on them or that most people put on themselves by staying within this kind of conventional framework, or at least the framework that's put, thrust upon them. But
well, what's interesting about that, if you read Bakunin,
Mhm.
and if you read Emma Goldman,
Mm.
You'll find that communist Russia was not communist from the start. They said we're gonna like implement state capitalism, and we'll just use it as a transition period while we nationalize things, and take them over. That never ended up happening. They just ended up with a lot of control and a lot of people profiting from that control while the economy got destroyed.
Yeah.
Because you can't really do mixed. You either got to just say we're communist or not be communist. So like if you have a group of people who say, don't worry, we'll have the class revolution tomorrow, we'll have the dictatorship of the proletariat tomorrow, somehow it just turns into a dictatorship where Bakunin got kicked out of like Marx's stupid First International Union, despite having a large amount of popularity with that union, because they called him a spy. Because he kept on saying, hey, your dictatorship of the proletariat is just going to turn into a new class.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a class over the common person, a class over the proletariat. You're self-sabotaging the whole idea of revolutionary leftism. And then Emma Goldman later, who lived in Russia, would remark on the results of this mentality by saying that there is no communism in Russia. That's an essay you can read on the Anarchist Library. And you can hear her talk about the fact that basically the whole thing is designed so that like the top benefits at the expense of the worker, and it's worse than ever now because it seems like a revolution, but really just the poor have it worse than ever, and they have to hide from the government if they want to do anything.
Yeah.
Like there are articles on Agorist Nexus about like how the gray market helped defeat communism. I like where they're coming from, but what I will say is that I like anything about communism like needs to be seen through the lens of what the leaders actually proposed. And for instance, Mao Zedong said that China's communism would have to start with state capitalism, and that would be part of the transition period. You can find that on Marxist.org. That's a quote, and he repeatedly said it. When's the communism coming? Because right now all we have is a centrally planned economy of state capitalism and highly exploited workers with a monoculture and phones that turn off your money if you're too close to somebody they don't like. That's fascism. That's not communism.
Yeah.
And maybe they can do it at some point if they want to flip the switches right and just make the people submit. But they ain't done it yet, and that would certainly remove their participation in global markets, because global markets can't interface with communism if global markets are based on state capitalism.
Right.
So the whole thing, like, global politics for a long time has been a joke.
Yeah.
And like seeing things through the lens of trying to escape from that while not like becoming too much of a suspect is an extremely good way to think. And that's one of the ways that agorists sort of thrive. I mean, like some people like think that agorism is just, hey, win Bitcoin user. But like, no, because first off, like Bitcoin has some issues with governability. And then second off, Kongan didn't use Bitcoin and he was an agorist.
Yeah.
I mean, you can use cryptocurrency and it's fine in agorism, but really you need to like think of it first from a principled perspective because it's primarily a philosophy of action and sort of lifestyle rather than like any specific form of thing. Like you could be an anti-capitalist agorist. You could just completely self-sufficiently live in the middle of the woods, only trading occasionally for what you need, and you would be an agorist. You could be an Amish person and be an agorist. You could be like, the whole point of agorism is that you're doing things as far outside of the normal, like state controlled and observed markets as possible to maximize your freedom, minimize their impact, and minimize their ability to extract their lifeblood from you.
Yeah. And that is a common misconception. I think a lot of people out there, they'll use the word agorist, or more specifically, they'll use the more general term, just anarchist, right? It came up in this HBO documentary talking about, the anarchists at Anarchapulco, which is kind of like the corporate version of anarchy, if there even is one. But yeah, a lot became tied to this, I don't know if it was a synergy or just overlap with, some of the first adopters of Bitcoin, or the first major adopters of Bitcoin. I mean, crypto is a tool, right? Crypto's not a philosophy. Crypto's not a way of life, or a perspective. It's a means to an end, right? So like, what are you looking to get to? It's why I think a lot of people, Sal Mayweather specifically, I mean, he's not a Bitcoin guy, he's a Bitcoin Cash guy, simply because that works better as a tool for him in, day-to-day commerce, right? At least how he's operating his business. And to your point, barter has always been an agorist a tool or mechanism, right? Just simply nowadays using gold or silver is also an agorist mechanism, because you're, doing those transactions away from, that mechanism that's geared towards oversight, and then also, control, and then theft, which is a huge sticking point for me personally. I mean, I've found it really hard, as someone who has lived a very conventional white market normie type of life up until like a couple of years ago, to really begin to extract or even conceptualize of all of the different ways that I was living my life that were completely tapped into the matrix, right? And then I even find myself nowadays doing things, and I'm like, why the hell? Like, if I was looking for a product or something, it's so easy to default to something like an Amazon, or something like that that's convenient, right? When truthfully, that thing that you need could be available at a swap meet down the street, or it could be available at, a thrift store or something like that. And so
Free cycle.
yes, yeah, Free Cycle, any of the like charities that run some of these stores and stuff like that, like I mean, like, they won't take crypto or anything like that, but they'll take cash, which is also, interestingly enough, becoming also one of those things that is maybe not necessarily purely agorist, but it's going to become more agorist than it was in the past, because just physical cash itself is becoming almost like this extinct thing. I did want to ask you about, Biden just signed that executive order about exploring central bank digital currencies. You've already had a number of central banks throughout the world that are basically either already gearing up to do it, or they're putting the pieces in place right now. What's your take on that? I mean, it's a really, really scary freaking prognosis to think that billions of people will be under this kind of digital currency system that's controlled by a central bank?
So I've been talking about this for many years now. Like, I've been officially writing about it for, like, 2.5 years, and I've been talking about it for longer
Yeah.
because I connected some dots in that regard. And one of the dots I connected was I looked at ID 2020 when that was starting to be a thing. And I looked at the Digital Dollar Project, which I was already looking into. And the Digital Dollar Project is, Microsoft, Accenture, and the Rockefellers, and a few other people, right? And like, the ID 2020 project was Microsoft, and the like, Rockefellers and Accenture, and this was happening at the same time as they were talking about, like, isolating global control with Event 201. And so all of this stuff is happening at around the same time, and I connected some dots and realized these people are trying to create a facial recognition super state, just like China has, because China had already been advertising that because of their 5G network, and their smart cities being connected to this network, they could control anything they wanted. Like, they had this ad for, like, their like, nationwide security thing, where, like, somebody with a facial recognition camera on their head could see a digital readout, like a HUD in a video game, and they could see, like, your information, and all of it would come up, and they could, like, immediately say, like, this guy was, like, is a suspect in X, Y, and Z, and they chased him through the city, and they were doing things like closing gates and rising pylons in the middle of the street, and all of this stuff, centrally managed by the government, because, like, this guy popped up on a facial recognition database. And then I said, not only is this, like, a thing that they want everywhere, but it's coming here now. And I proved that by connecting some dots. Like, the Bilderberg group publicizes all of their information for their meetings. Like, they publicize, like, liner notes, and give you a general idea of what this secret off the record meeting of a bunch of global Kabbalists is about. And they said, like, that previous year, they said that their subjects were going to be, like, China, Russia, New World Order kind of AI sort of thing, like, all this stuff. And what I noticed is that China was right there, and 5G was right there, and all of this information sort of clicked, and it was like they want to build a global 5G superstate. It's one of the reasons that I hate Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is enabling this, like, global surveillance superstate with Starlink.
Yeah.
And he's also he was very proud to say that his devices connect to mobile devices. Like, his satellite network will, like, is already able to reach mobile devices. And so you can get mobile data off of his satellites. And what that means is that with his plan of basically 0 dead zones in the entire world, and everybody being connected, the entire world will be able to be surveilled all at once because of this guy that libertarians suck the cock of. And so that, and his Neuralink will almost certainly be on a similar mobile technology, because it's a chip interfacing with, like, other technology for the purposes of input output, where he's sticking wires in people's brains. And then that, combined with the fact that everything that is wireless was once wired, it's really looking bad in that regard. But, like, this isn't about Elon Musk. He's just a piece of shit con artist who's slowly building dystopia around us, and potentially the Antichrist. Like, the ultimate thing is that, like, the global, like, cabal, the New World Order, really wants this sort of thing to happen. They've been building this for a while, and CBDC is a fundamental linchpin of global enslavement, because it's there telling everybody, you do what we say or we'll do what China did and turn your phone red.
Yeah.
And with the influx of smart technology fucking everywhere, like American cities with suddenly so many infrastructure projects, you tell me they're not building a smart like city in every major city, and I'll call you a delusional slave
There's
already.
I don't know if you saw this, but there's some website where you can actually, it's either a website or an app. You can upload a selfie of yourself, and then it will go, and all of the cities that have digital video camera grids and live feeds, it will go parse all of that video footage and then send you back a picture of yourself taking the selfie, because it's using essentially uh you know uh reference points in the background of the picture to then match up where you were at the time and date of you taking that picture. It's freaking like George Orwell could not have like prophesied any of this shit. And most of the people, when they read him, they're like, wow, like that would be really bad if we got there. We're like, we're there, man. Like we're
We're
beyond there. I mean, like
yeah,
we're getting to that point. The other thing that really kind of stuck with me was when these folks in China go to basically protest the bank that had essentially stolen all of their deposits, and they said they froze them, but just the money ain't there, right?
right.
And they go to protest, and the two
Their phones turn
organizers,
red
yeah, they shut down their COVID pass so that they couldn't get on a freaking train. Like that shit's
because it was
fucking
never about
scary.
COVID.
Yeah, well, so that was the other thing was, let me ask you this, is a little bit of a sidebar, but my thought process in China has not been like this whole COVID zero thing. I think it hasn't been about COVID. I mean, like maybe it was at the beginning, but now it seems more so a way of stopping or quelling dissent within the state, because of the economic downturn that's happening.
Well, that's what it
Um,
was always about. It was never about the other stuff. It was never about, flattening the curve. It was never about people's health. If it was about that, I've written multiple articles for Agorist Nexus about this that I think people would benefit from. So the first thing is that they're already like this facial recognition thing. They're giving they like a year and a half ago they started to give it to U.S. cops,
mm,
and like they gave it to cops in Flint, Michigan, and they were called by the Free Thought Project RoboCop helmets because they were the same helmets, but they were also they were the same HUD readout, but they were also like police helmets that made the cops look like RoboCops. Um, so they like they're it's coming here everywhere, and it already is here in some places, and you should really like be very concerned about it being everywhere. And that's just that like element on its own, and not all the people wandering around with cameras out and pointed at everything all the time with apps like Pokemon Go and Ingress, both like fueled by the same people who did like Google Maps, and like global satellite footage for the military and intelligence industrial complex,
mm,
who were directly funded by the CIA. Um, you know that is kind of thing that people should be concerned about, but they aren't. So they already got like this sort of thing, and they can fill in the gaps with other people's technology because they always have somebody with their phone out and their camera pointed at something, and they've always got a source of security cam footage if they want it. That's the whole point of these eliminating these dark zones, is potentially you can increase the surface area of the global surveillance state to almost near perfect condition. And then like the CBDC is all about that. And
yeah,
so I've got multiple articles. I've got the original one that I wrote called Panopticon Rising, COVID-19 and the Elite Enslavement Plan. I've got 10 ways the US government's COVID response is worsening your health. And I've also got the Great Reset, exploiting disease for profit and power. And so all of these things are there. And, I've been sort of ringing the bell on a lot of the specifics on the way that this is going to work for a while now. And I also did a podcast, like 2 podcast episode with Brandon and Dag at the Agorist Nexus about Agenda 2030 and how like that's the latest nail in the coffin in regards to like using SDGs or sustainable development goals for all these purposes. So that the first one got removed from YouTube. You can find both episodes still on Odyssey if you go there. But like YouTube has a tendency of censoring content that I'm in for some reason. So you know, that's a thing. The point is that like all of those things have been talking about this for some time, and like the CBDC that they're implementing has never been about anything other than control. And if it was about health, then they wouldn't have fucked up your health while doing it. Like, because staying indoors, ordering takeout, not working out, not coming into contact with any pathogens to give your immune system a workout, not having the proper levels of vitamins, especially D, because you're staying indoors and the American diet sucks. Having all of this compound with a high stress environment, which, suppresses all of the beneficial immune enhancing like hormones and shit. Like that is going to cause any pandemic to get worse. And when it's not getting worse, just the pandemic itself, the general environment was such that people were abusing drugs in ever greater quantities and being abused in ever greater quantities because they were forced and stuck indoors with their abusers. And so many instances of suicide have just popped up in the past couple of years. I did a video recently about how the elite want to destroy the population, and another video about how the lockdowns benefited the rich at the expense of the poor. Both of those can be found at Jeremiah Talks on YouTube. And in general, the vibe everybody should think of is that they have been trying to isolate control, crush dissent, and they've been experimenting with it in as many places as possible.
Yeah, it's you can almost when you look back through the progression of how we got here, and I'm talking even before 2020, there's been this series of, I guess I would call them experiments, right, where they've floated different whether it be crises or what they would consider policy changes and things like that, that have essentially led to this point, right? And it's really unnerving how easily people just kind of like got in line. I mean, like it's definitely like sheep or cattle walking into the abattoir. Like the lack of questioning, and granted, the lack of questioning is it's a chilling effect that's brought on by them nailing people to the wall that are looked at as troublemakers and things like that. And then it's also
banning me from Twitter for 1.5 years.
Yeah. Well, I hear congratulations is in order. You actually got your Twitter account back. I don't know why. Was there some kind of appeal that went through, or
they after 1.5 years, they said, we're sorry for the inconvenience. Our automation anti-spam bullshit did some fucked shit, and thanks.
Yeah,
we hope to see you again. And so like also a bunch of people got like Twitter literally lied to them by saying like, this is one of the things that really like tipped me off to the inadequacy of Twitter's report feature, is that a bunch of people are now confirmed to have been lied to about the reason my account was suspended. A bunch of people who reported me celebrated after it, and they celebrated that my account had been suspended for hate speech, for abuse and harassment, for all this stuff, because I made pedos and Nazis mad. And so like a bunch of things like that were sent out because Twitter's system said, yeah, just tell them, every one of them, that they did a good job by helping our snitch system. You know, they'll do that. That's how they're controlling everybody now, is
Yep.
that they got everybody on social media. Social media is what's driving the discourse. The common discourse being driven by social media means that mega corporations get to lie about their like platform status and instead become a publisher, pushing a specific narrative and informational thing down everybody's throats, and training them to be little fascist puppets, like the FBI telling Facebook that that they shouldn't run a story about Hunter Biden is so strong, and Facebook's like, we're not going to get rid of it entirely, but we'll definitely suppress it for you, FBI.
Yeah.
Twitter, basically the trending section being constantly full of their agenda, whatever they want you to believe for the day, and keeping people on Twitter in their exact mentality and mindset that they want them to be in. It's exhausting to
Yeah.
be on these platforms, and trying to parse any sort of propaganda out of it and remove the chaff from the wheat. But
What
like, you know,
what are your alternatives that you go to? So like you already mentioned, you have videos up on Odyssey and stuff like that. In terms of your personal content consumption, are you consuming a lot of content on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, or do you turn to other places like, Odyssey or other kind of blockchain type solutions that are out there?
I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm on Gab, I'm on Minds, I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Float, I'm on all of these platforms, and you can just Google Insanity is free and you'll probably find, or like look it up on the platform you're on, it'll probably pop me up.
Yeah.
All that stuff is there. And also like I've got backup accounts on Twitter, and because they're the only ones who are major platforms suspending me.
Mm.
Reddit also did it. I'm starting to be censored on YouTube if people have my content on their page. They haven't censored any of my content, which is fucking strange because I say exactly the same thing on my channel. So I don't know, whatever the fuck. But the point is that like, I'm pretty much everywhere, and also I have a news channel in my Discord server, and that news channel is a collated feed of a bunch of different anarchist and conspiracy channels, and some more mainstream ones like Foreign Policy Magazine, all designed to give people there a feed of information about the goings on of the elite. And
Mm.
so I can just click that news tab and get my fill of news. I also spend about like 2 hours a day absorbing scientific papers and YouTube videos, usually at the same time using a speed reader. And
Mm.
so, like, I keep myself apprised of a variety of information. I'm, reading and writing a few things. Like, there's a lot of things, but mostly I try to go directly to the source, instead of trusting the mediated experience of Twitter or
Mm.
Facebook or any of these platforms. Especially since if you trust the mediated experience of a platform like Gab, you're likely to become a Nazi. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, I can say that it's like a never-ending struggle because I do frequent like other alternative platforms. Like I'm a big Hive person, so like I'm on Hive pretty often. And that kind of gives you a really good international perspective. But it's so varied. I mean, like there's such a it's like it's a growing platform, but it's like a community of such eclectic people that like if I want to find like a plethora of like one type of information, sometimes it's good, and then sometimes it's like if someone's not in that country writing about that stuff, then you're kind of short on that stuff. In fact, one of the places I went to was Web 3.0 when some of the fighting heated back up between the Palestinians and the Israelis, just to find out what the truth of it is, because God forbid you read some kind of corporatist media here in the US and then just digest that and think it's the truth, and it ends up being complete bullshit because all of the particulars, I mean, on Web3 they actually had like live footage of the conflict, and they showed how everything played out, and it was obviously lied about in the Western press.
Sort of
you
like
know
Ukraine.
yeah, yeah, exactly like Ukraine. Well, so let me ask you about that. So, you've been as vocal as anyone probably about the funding of this proxy war that's going on, kind of the the corporate press would paint Zelensky and the Ukrainian, specifically military, as these freedom fighters that are of the highest moral quality, and that's why we have to send them tens of billions of dollars. I haven't stayed as uh, up to date on it. I know recently, supposedly, the Ukrainians gained back a large amount of area, but then again, when I kind of fact check that, it seems like the Russians just strategically pulled back from that area because they needed to secure lines so that they could get votes done in some of these regions for those regions to defect from Ukraine and become part of Russia. What's your read on the current situation that's going on over there?
So I want to preface all of this by saying fuck the Russian government and Putin. They're fascists in the same way that like all other fake state communist dictatorships have been.
Oh yeah.
Putin lives in a fucking castle, basically, a mansion in the middle of, and that's why he didn't like his political opposition flying a drone over the fucking palace he lives in, because it kind of made him look like he wasn't for the people.
Yeah.
But that being said, and also fuck the Wagner group and those Nazis that Putin employs, I have to say that, and the reason I have to say that is because the histrionic liars will attack me as a Putin stooge if I don't say things that would get me killed by Putin. So
I'm surprised you don't have a Ukraine flag behind you.
See, but these two are better for liberty.
I agree.
The Joker ended the Fed, and Sonic is an anti-fascist freedom fighter. So,
I agree.
So the general thing is that, I hate the Russian government. I've spent a significant amount of time opposing them over the year, but you can't just talk about the Ukrainian corruption without people accusing you of being a stooge.
Yeah.
You've got to preface it, you've got to pad it out, you've got to be ultimately somewhat bootlicky to the agenda, or they call you a traitor.
Yeah.
And they also insinuate that I'm a Trumpist because the new Cold War, the new Red Scare, is the Republicans, not the Democrats.
Yeah.
So ultimately, go.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, it's funny how McCarthyism is alive and well in the United States. You just it's just changed a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well, and part of that, I made a video recently on the CIA and how they're a Cold War faucet, but they're also from before the Cold War, essentially, when it was sort of starting to heat up, ironically. And when the US government needed to spy on Russia post World War II, they literally hired Nazis in the form of Reinhard Gehlen and the Gehlen Organization. And when they needed to go to war in any capacity, they had the Bundeswehr through NATO, and they had Nazi generals leading head positions at NATO. So it's not actually a surprise to those of us who've been aware of this for a while and aware of them, funding and arming and supporting and training right-wing radicals who are against the communism in their country, that, after supporting the Nazis, after supporting the Mujahideen, after supporting the Contras and the Pinochet regime, after supporting anything that they could get their hands on because communism bad, which is why I get my hackles up whenever some right libertarian cocksucker, and I call him that because it's funnier than saying Coke, the name of the Koch brothers, when one of those people pipes up and says, hey, yeah, there's a communist threat, there's leftism everywhere. Yeah. It's well, then why does the US government so consistently and successfully crush any sort of leftism? It seems to me that the people who consistently win are the bigger threat. But maybe I'm fucking stupid and I just don't understand how the bigger, more mighty force is the weaker party. Anyway,
yeah.
Pointer is they've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
And they, totally didn't do 9/11 either. And that's not why Tim Osman, or Bin Laden, as he was called when they weren't using his American name, was the patsy immediately for 9/11. And there weren't any explosions, and there wasn't $2.3 trillion. And Rumsfeld didn't do nothing wrong. And there is nothing at all to look into there at all. And that's why they dumped the body in the ocean, even though they never do that in any other circumstance,
Yeah.
because it was all totally legitimate and nobody lied.
Yeah, for
So,
fear of retribution. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, what?
mhm.
Now, I mean, like that. When you have a lack of transparency like that, or when you have just blatant lying like that, people tend to try and fill in the blanks themselves, right? I said, I forget if it was Alex Jones or someone else. They were basically telling the story that they felt like Osama had been on ice for like a year and a half or 2 years, and they just pulled him out, thawed him, and then like had some bullshit raid or conflict in an empty building or something like
It
that.
was really good for propaganda too.
Yeah, it was like
Um,
amazing.
and crashing a helicopter is just standard operating procedure. So anyway, point is that the US government is totally honest and never lies and never funds any evil people for the purposes of opposing Russia. And the CIA totally isn't a faucet for, state capitalist interests and the spreading of US imperialism around the world. And they would never do anything like, helping fund a bunch of Ukrainian Nazis for years and years until this sort of conflict boiled over.
Mm.
And use, Russia being on the border of their places as the reason, because, hey, Russia's at the doorstep of NATO countries, and that means that we have to do something, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, NATO kind of keeps moving closer and Russia's kind of staying. So I don't know about that.
How credible do you think it is that Putin, in some of his most recent comments or this speech that he gave, he had basically said that there was somewhat of an understanding in fact, but hadn't been written down between Russia and Ukraine before the invasion started. But Russia understanding the power dynamic and NATO's involvement, he wanted something in writing from the Biden administration, and they flat out refused to give it to him, and that's why he essentially decided to go forward with the conflict. Like, how much of that do you believe? Like, I don't.
I don't
Again, I
believe
mean, like,
Putin either. I think
well, no,
that's
I mean, like, I don't like either of them. I mean, like, both the Biden administration and the Putin regime are or they're both regimes, but both of those regimes are hell bent on propagandizing every single move, right? So
yeah.
I don't. I'm like, I think everyone's full of bullshit on that level, right? But from that standpoint, I think a lot of people who are still in the anti-war camp tend to believe at least some element of that coming from Putin, saying that he was willing to stand down if there were certain concessions from NATO, but specifically the U.S. as essentially the power seat in NATO. How much of that do you believe? I mean, like, do you think he was going to go forward with it regardless, or do you think there was a way to avoid it?
I would just say I wouldn't be surprised, but I think that the elites have wanted this to happen for a while now, and that they've sort of been cooling down on war in the Middle East, and they needed a new excuse to fight Russia. Because remember, the reason for the Mujahideen, Russia. The reason for the Nazis, Russia. It's always been Russia. And even when it wasn't Russia, it was because communism, because the other places were just stopping communism. It's always been using communism as an excuse to be like, interfering and supportive of the state capitalist empire. So, I think they were going to do this anyway. And one of the reasons I believe that is that if you look into the Ukrainian policy now and what they're ramping up for, they're ramping up for a significant amount of the same stuff that the rest of the global program is. They're building up a 5G super state infrastructure. They're building up smart cities. They're building up, all of this stuff. They've got this whole new plan for a digital citizenship in Ukraine. So anybody in the world can be a Ukrainian citizen, sort of like Estonia or that space station thing. And they're doing all of this seemingly because after the war, they're going to build on the rubble of the old society a massive new Western footprint in that region. And that's the reason that the West has been backing them for so long, because the West is on board with this system and they needed a way to make sure that it happened. So why not have a bunch of people buy citizenship in the country, rebuild the country with that new infrastructure, and have everybody out of the country so that it can be nice and built in that region, so that they can have a smart dystopia right on Russia's doorstep, so that anything Russia does will be more monitorable, and there will probably be friendly US bases in the area and a bunch of things, you know? And if we need to fund Ukrainian Nazis, if we need to back C-14, a Ukrainian Nazi gang, in order to, you know, succeed in Euromaidan, if we need to back the Azov battalion while they post Nazi videos to, you know, the internet, support Nazi battalions in World War II in like propaganda videos through NATO, if we need to do all of this stuff with like Right Sector and Svoboda, if we need to do all of this stuff with all of these Nazi organizations there, if we need to constantly peel back our support because, hey, we just posted another picture with a Totenkopf, wouldn't that be fucking wild? Like if US soldiers were constantly seen in any picture with Totenkopf, then that would be considered a real fucking problem. If US soldiers were seen with daily Stormer patches, it would be a real fucking problem.
Mm-hmm.
But they can have all the shit they want. They can have all the propaganda they want. They can have all the Nazism they want. Jon Stewart handed a medal to somebody in an official Department of Defense authorized propaganda / sports event associated with ESPN, and this guy has a Sonnenrad on his elbow, a tattoo, and an Azov Battalion shirt. An Azov Battalion, hey, wouldn't you know, up until recently, when there was a bunch of hullabaloo about it, they had both a Sonnenrad and a Wolfsangr in their symbol. And the Wolfsangr was a symbol of, you know, Nazi stormtroopers, and the fucking Sonnenrad was a symbol of the SS. So, hey, maybe don't fucking do that if you're not Nazis, but they're Nazis. And
Yeah.
it's not okay to bring up this stuff. It's not okay to bring up how many Nazis there are, because if you do, you're a Russian propagandist, even if you hate Russia and will say things that would get you killed if you lived in Russia.
Yeah.
You can still be a Russian propagandist, even if you're directly immune to Russian propaganda and have been speaking out against it for years, because you're not buying the Ukraine war bullshit that the West wants to shove down your throat like a giant meaty cock.
Well, I find it funny when, like, online, if you point out the Nazism that's you know, contained within the Ukrainian fighting forces, you know, one of the retorts is, "Oh, well, there's Nazis in Russia too, so like, you know, that like checkmate." And you're like, "Wait, no, hold on, that just starts the conversation." So you're saying that there's good Nazis that we should give weapons to, and that we should fight the bad Nazis? Like, how do you even mentally fucking resolve that?
I
Like,
wonder how they would. I wonder how they would respond if I went down to the Unite the Right rally. Like I had a time machine, went down to the Unite the Right rally, and handed them a bunch of Kalashnikovs and said, "Have
yeah,
at it."
yeah, yeah.
Are Nazis good Nazis, or are their Nazis the only good Nazis we can arm? Which
What's funny?
Nazis are acceptable to arm? I need to know.
Wait, what's funny is that's like that, like, in a microcosm that's almost kind of similar to what we go along with it here in the United States. Like, all right,
Yep.
which fascists do we want to give power to? Right? Like, do we want
Yeah.
the people who lie about being left fascist, or the people who lie about being right fascist? Like, or lie about not being right fascist?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
it's
well, and I'll just, you know, next time there's a January 6th, somebody should just go down there with a bunch of NATO crates and say, have at it, because clearly it's acceptable to arm, you know, Nazis, and everybody who supports Trump is a fascist. You know, we'll just buy all the propaganda and universalize it.
So this is something that is interesting that came up. It's come up repeatedly. It came up in the episode that my wife and I just did in the reaction to Del Bigtree interviewing Alex Jones. And this is something where, like, there's a lot of insanity that comes out of Alex's mouth, and then every so often he hits on something that's a very, at least, interesting point to kind of like pick apart. And he essentially talked about how these people that are hell bent on power, almost in this kind of like law of physics, equal and opposite reaction. They're essentially creating the boogeymen that will end up becoming even worse than what they think they're fighting now. And it's really it's unnerving that there are people out there that will essentially try and win at all costs, because essentially what they're saying is, okay, we're going to create this, this evil character, right? And essentially build them up to what they become, so that they're a formidable villain for us to vilify, and then connect.
I've been saying
everyone
Trump
to.
is the boogeyman for a while.
Yeah, I mean, they made him. I mean, like they basically built that monster, right? And they built it because they felt like Dr. Frankenstein, that they could easily kill him, right? And politically,
they just didn't need to. Like,
well, no,
like
no, I mean, he
he's
was
been on
destined
board
to
this
stick his
whole
own foot in
time.
his mouth. Yeah, but that being said, like they're almost saying, okay, we want power and control. We're going to create this, villain or monster to kind of like make it seem like there's
Problem,
a battle
reaction,
of good and
solution.
evil.
David Icke.
Right. And then what they don't understand is that if that monster grows too powerful, they're also kind of either assuming or complicitly saying, well, if we can't be in power, no one can. Right. And so that's kind of what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. It's almost like, okay, Western civilization or the Western countries want control of that region. They want cultural and political control of that region. And if we can't have it, then just let the fucking missiles fly and we'll freaking rebuild from the rubble. Like, it's really freaking scary.
Well, and like that's the roots of hegemony. It's always imperialist and it's always designed for ultimate control. And that's the reason they've got the CBDC, so that they've got like a one-way mirror, a global surveillance state.
Yep.
That's the reason that they're arming Nazis. That's the reason that they're controlling the economy, pushing their like military agenda and so many others. That's the reason, is because if state capitalism goes down in one place, then it's a threat to state capitalism everywhere. And they don't really care about human rights. They're fine with human rights violations from Saudi Arabia. They're fine with human rights violations from the Chinese government. They're fine with the human rights violations that the Ukrainian government was doing to the people in the Donbass and anybody who remotely sympathized with Russia post Euromaidan. They're fine with Israel's human rights violations upon the Palestinians. They're fine with the human rights violations perpetuated in Libya, as long as it's not with Gaddafi, who threatened the petrodollar. They're fine with all of this shit. They're fine with anything that helps their power, and they will oppose anything that doesn't. And it has nothing to do with freedom or democracy or peace or justice or jack fucking shit. And anybody who disagrees with that is a sold out slave and a bitch.
I think that sums it all up. I think we've basically described existence right now. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was the economy. So, like, we started off talking about counter economics, right? How much do you pay attention to? Like, I still pay attention to. It's just like it's like an addiction. Like, I still pay attention to, what I would call the casino, right? Like the stocks and bonds markets, as well as other, kind of paper investment markets, which everyone on our end of the line knows is complete crap. I mean, it's like, it's all valuations that are based off of hopes and dreams and bullshit. Like, but it definitely seems like they've finally stepped in it, right? Like, they're between a rock and a hard place, and everything that everyone who understands economics has been saying is going to happen seems like it's going to come home to roost. And it seems like it's going to pave the way for some of these things and make them more palatable to people that lose all of their savings, or their pension benefits get cut because their pension funds drop and everything like that.
Well,
do you think that's a feature or a bug? Like, do you think they're intentionally trying to crash it?
Here's the fun part. Yes. And the reason is because just like Ukraine, if you want to build your new dystopia, the easiest way to do it is to build it upon the rubble of a society which relied on the previous model, having the rug pulled out from under them. So if you want to get the common person to acquiesce to the modern form of currency, make them extremely poor and broke to the previous form, and say, we'll help you out if you accept the new currency. You can participate in the economy again and maybe not be evicted.
That's like it is the ultimate slavery, right? Like that is the ultimate level of control over an individual, is just being and we got a taste of it over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But just being able to, like, people think of slavery in terms of, the what they're taught in history class, right? Like, and they're talking about basically Southern slavery and things like that.
And of course, they fail to recognize that that's not been abolished, and the 13th Amendment allowed for criminals to be slaves, which means that the 13th Amendment and Abraham Lincoln are the foundation of Jim Crow laws in the prison industrial complex. Go
100%.
ahead.
Yeah, and they've taken it a step further. Like, it has no longer been their sole goal to enslave the most vulnerable or the poorest among us. They're now really focused on expanding that to essentially 99.9% of people. Maybe a little bit less on the percentage. Maybe they'll let some of those, like, less than billionaire pipsqueaks in, but it definitely seems like that is the end goal. And the collapse of um, what people will incorrectly call the free markets, or the collapse of capitalism, which is basically state capitalism, is going to essentially pave the road for it. And like in many cases of mass slavery throughout time, the people will cheer for it. I think they'll welcome it, which is really depressing.
Well, and that's part of the fun, is that they've been ramping up this anti-communist propaganda machine for a really long time, and getting everybody to hate the left and better dead than red and rah rah America. And so I'm not on board with authoritarian communism. I think nationalizing resources rather than simply forming your own shit and fighting anybody who aggresses is probably not a great idea if you want freedom ultimately. And it's also not a great idea to poke the bear like that with such limited resources. It's a good way to end up like Allende. But Allende, whatever, I don't fucking care. The point is that ultimately the machine is based on getting everybody to believe that the threat is always somewhere else, that you can always point the finger at the threat somewhere else. And so communism is that threat, and now Trump is associated with that threat because of Russia, and so is anybody that they want to be. And not because Trump is going to get arrested, not because Trump is going to, have anything really super negative happen to him, but because at this point they can just point at Republicans too, not just Democrats like they could already do with COINTELPRO. They can point at Republicans too and call them Kremlin assets or something. Russiagate could be proven a total hoax, which it was. And they'll still say that, anybody I don't like is a Kremlin asset. They can point at communism, commies. And, everybody from your establishment Democrats to the coke-sucking libertarian bootlickers that lie about supporting liberty while supporting fascist and alt-right mentalities, they'll all support it because it's what they know, it's what they already do. And, the communist threat must be stopped. And so they've done that, and they've successfully ramped up this machine that means that the common person has accepted that the threat is always somewhere else. And, the free market is considered sacrosanct, and you can't fucking say shit about it, or you're with X, Y, and Z group, or you must not, you're a dirty hippie and you need to get a job, meaning one of the jobs we like, not the counter economy.
Right.
you need to acquiesce to the system. You need to accept our total control and totally accept everything we say, or we will cut you off. And the state capitalist apparatus has created this mentality in order to make everybody super afraid of communism and the Red Menace, and the threats over there, so that they don't realize that the real threat has been brewing under their noses the whole time, and with their support in the form of the state capitalist fascist behemoth at home. Friendly fascism, as Consolidated would call it.
Mm. Yeah. Have you read or written at all about this concept of mass formation? So it's really interesting psychologically, just from a looking at it from a almost kind of like a Noam Chomsky manufactured consent point of view, because it makes it seem even more insidious. Like when Chomsky wrote about manufactured consent, um, I think he thought about just in terms of controlling popular opinion. Um, the idea of mass formation takes it so much further because it becomes a psychosis almost, or not necessarily a psychosis, but almost like a trance that people get put into. Um, and I can definitely see elements when they talk about what is important to be in place for a mass formation to be created. I mean, we've had the textbook examples of some of these things. It's isolation. It's large swaths of the population being depressed and using pharmaceuticals or other types of self-medicating means to deal with their mental state. It's the cutting down of communication, the segregation of dissenting voices, so that you are never presented with someone who kind of sees things differently and is brave enough to say things that are against, say, the common narrative. And then just the utter extent that the members within the formation will go to essentially deny evidential fact that's right in their face to protect the formation, right? Like they could be presented with something that is so painfully true. I mean, like their family members are dying from either complications from the COVID lockdowns and things like that, or complications from the shots and all this other stuff. And even still with that, they still continue to defend, this imminent threat that they can't even put their finger on. Like they don't even know what it is. They just know it exists, right? And they need Big Daddy government to help them and protect them from it.
Because they believe what they're told.
Yeah.
Like I literally, okay, so here's a fun example to maybe lighten the mood before we sign off, because then I've got another stream in like 8 minutes.
Oh, good.
But like the general, like, I saw this thing and it pissed me off because I've seen it over and over and over again, and I finally decided to say something more direct about it. I saw yet another person in somebody's comments sections, some right-wing loser mewling about the tragic audacity of the school system to put cat litter in school restrooms for kids who identify as furries.
Oh my God.
That never happened.
Yeah.
It was always a lie. It was always a lie told by transphobic Republicans who, like transphobic alleged libertarians, like latched onto in order to spread this transphobic lie, because the whole point of it was to scare people. Well, if they let people identify as dogs, then maybe the identity stuff has gone too far. And if they let people identify as XYZ, oh no, it's going to the point where they're indoctrinating our children with this litter boxes in schools. They're already doing it. There are litter boxes in schools for kids who identify as furries.
Yeah.
And there never was, but that doesn't stop these right-wing stupid bootlicking losers from spreading it around like it's true, even though they have no proof. And so I made this post about it that said, like, if you're one of the people who's been spreading this around, you have no business correcting anybody on anything ever.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you know, like a ton of people came to my post in order to bootlick the right-wing narrative and claim that this was definitely happening. Did any of them have any proof, even after multiple people asked them for proof?
Yeah.
Fucking nobody.
Yeah.
Jack fucking nobody. Because it's a lie, and because they've been trained to spread whatever lies help the agenda of the person they're bootlicking that week.
Yep.
It's pathetic, it's servile, it's obsequious nonsense, and it's going to kill us all.
I would love to find out from them whether or not they think it's a more credible threat to society to have furry litter boxes in schools, or to continue to teach that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq after 9/11.
Yeah. Or just the benefits of state capitalism and market participation while CBDC is taking over. Like, the schools aren't saying jack shit about that, and kids think I'm an insane conspiracy theorist if I bring it up to Gen Z most of the time.
Yeah.
Because they're propagandized and indoctrinated, and the truth doesn't matter.
Yeah. And in true agorist form, like, if you have such a problem with the system, vacate it. Get out. Like, stop trying to fix something that is basically corrupted.
Abolish the Department of Education.
Yeah. I mean,
hey,
take the money away.
The alleged left hates me for saying that. Otherwise, we couldn't. Like, a dumb population is worse than a non-dumb. And then I'm just like, well, then educate them yourself. And here's an added benefit. 92% and at over $1 trillion of these student loans that are out there are to the Department of Education. So if we were willing to abolish the Department of Education and get rid of all their accounts, 92% of student loans would be forgiven immediately.
Look at that. That might be a way to actually abolish student loans, as opposed to paying off banksters for making them.
An absolutely tiny, abysmal amount of it from that Biden stupid fascist cabal. Like, it's very evil. Like, he gave people tiddlywinks and pissed in their open mouths, and they said, give me more.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. May I have another? Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Well, I will let you get to the next stream that you have to get onto. I appreciate it. We're going to have to do this more often. Hopefully, I can have you on again in the future. And then if you got something I can help you out with, I would be more than happy to. So
awesome.
Like I said, if you want to go through, I don't know if you read Anti-Politics. I'm pretty sure
I haven't. He's willing. He's welcome to send me a PDF if he's willing. I'm not in the like space to buy books right now, but I'll do a review if he sends me one. So Sal, we're still mutuals, so feel free to DM me.
That works. In that case, myself and Jocelyn will be back Monday at 9:30 to do part 2 of the reaction to the Alex Jones interview. And definitely hit up Jeremiah. Definitely hit up Agorist Nexus. There's amazing information there. It will blow your world if you've never thought of yourself as an agorist or someone who wanted to necessarily separate from the system that's oppressing you. So with that, have a good night. Thanks, Jeremiah. Peace.